June 6, 1944. 156,000 Allied soldiers are about to storm 5 beaches in Normandy. The fate of the free world rests on this single operation. But what if it failed? What if those beaches became a graveyard instead of a gateway to liberation? This isn't some distant hypothetical. D-Day was a coin flip. General Dwight Eisenhower knew it. He'd already written 2 letters, one announcing victory, another accepting full blame for catastrophic failure. He kept that second letter in his pocket, ready to deliver it to the world. The weather was terrible. The tides were wrong. The Germans had 50 divisions in France. The Atlantic Wall bristled with artillery, machine guns, and mines. Rommel himself had inspected the defenses and declared them nearly impenetrable. At Omaha Beach, the Americans were slaughtered in the first wave. Bodies piled in the surf. The cliffs seemed impossible to scale. Officers were cut down before they reached the sand. For 2 hours, the invasion hung by a thread. But they pushed through. They made it. But what if they hadn't? Let's rewind and walk through a darker timeline. A timeline where the strongest defenses held, where German reinforcements arrived faster, where 1 or 2 critical decisions went differently. The catastrophe. June 6 to 10, 1944. The invasion begins the same way. Paratroopers drop behind enemy lines in the darkness. Naval bombardment lights up the pre-dawn sky. At 6:30 a.m., the first landing craft hit the beaches. But at Omaha, the slaughter's worse. The German 352nd Infantry Division, which wasn't supposed to be there, is fully alert and positioned perfectly. They have clear fields of fire. Every American soldier who steps off a landing craft enters a kill zone. By 9 a.m., Omaha's a complete disaster. 2,000 Americans dead in 3 hours. The beach is impassable. Landing craft are burning. The follow-up waves can't get through. At Utah Beach, the current pushed the landing craft to the wrong sector. But in our timeline, that was lucky. They landed in a lightly defended area. In this timeline, let's say they land exactly where planned, in a heavily fortified zone. Another bloodbath. Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches, the British and Canadians are making progress. But without American success at Utah and Omaha, they're exposed. German panzer divisions, which in our timeline were held back due to Hitler sleeping in and command confusion, are released immediately. By June 7th, the British and Canadian positions are being hammered by tank divisions. Without American forces securing the western flank, they're surrounded on 3 sides. Ocean behind them, Germans in front, and on both flanks. Eisenhower makes the hardest call of his life. Withdraw. Evacuate what forces can be saved. It's Dunkirk in reverse. Except this time, there's no miracle evacuation. The Luftwaffe, which still has strength in 1944, pounds the beaches relentlessly. German artillery has the range. U-boats lurk offshore. By June 10th, 65,000 Allied soldiers are dead or captured. Another 40,000 are wounded in the chaotic evacuation. Countless tons of equipment litter the beaches. Tanks, artillery, jeeps, ammunition. It's the worst military defeat in American history. Britain's bloodiest day since the Somme. The immediate aftermath, summer 1944. The news breaks like a thunderclap across the free world. In London, Churchill addresses Parliament. He's 69 years old, exhausted, and for the first time in the war, he sounds defeated. We have suffered a grave setback, he admits. But we shall return. We must return. Except no one believes it. Not really. How do you launch another invasion after losing 100,000 men in 4 days? Where do you get the landing craft, the soldiers, the political will? In Washington, Roosevelt faces a firestorm. It's an election year. He's running for an unprecedented 4th term against Thomas Dewey. The Republicans hammer him relentlessly. Roosevelt's war becomes Roosevelt's disaster. The American public, which has been reading about victory after victory in the Pacific and Italy, suddenly confronts the reality. This war might not be winnable, not against Nazi Germany, not if they can throw back our best punch. Mothers and fathers across America receive telegrams. The War Department regrets to inform you. Entire towns lose their sons on the same day. The national mood shifts from determination to grief to anger. But the worst reaction? Stalin's. The Eastern Front, the alliance fractures. The Soviets have been bleeding for 3 years. They've lost 20 million people. They've begged the Allies to open a second front. They've watched as America and Britain promised, "This year, we promise," in 1942, then 1943, then 1944. Now, finally, the invasion comes. And it fails. Stalin is apoplectic. In his mind, this proves what he suspected all along. The Western Allies want Germany and Russia to bleed each other dry. They're perfectly happy to let Soviets die by the millions while they safely consolidate power elsewhere. Soviet propaganda shifts overnight. The narrative becomes, "We stand alone against fascism. The capitalist West has betrayed us." Stalin starts making calculations. The Red Army's making progress. They've pushed the Germans back to Poland. Ukraine's liberated. But at what cost? Can the Soviet Union defeat Germany alone? And even if they can, what comes after? In July 1944, Soviet intelligence presents Stalin with disturbing news. Germany's nuclear weapons program is further along than anyone thought. Scientists at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute are making progress on uranium enrichment. They might have a functional bomb by late 1945. Stalin makes a decision that will reshape the next 50 years. He orders Soviet forces to capture German nuclear facilities and scientists at any cost. Whoever gets those scientists and that research will dominate the post-war world. The race is on. Except the Western Allies don't even know they're racing. Fortress Europe, summer 1944, spring 1945. With the invasion repelled, Hitler's position strengthens dramatically. The July 20th plot to assassinate him, which happened in our timeline, either doesn't occur or fails more completely. Hitler's convinced his intuition about defending the beaches was correct. His grip on power tightens. Germany redirects resources. The Atlantic Wall gets reinforced even more heavily. But more critically, production shifts. Those V-1 flying bombs and V-2 rockets that terrorized London, production ramps up massively. By September 1944, London's being hit by 200 V-2s per week. There's no defense against them. They travel faster than sound. You can't hear them coming. Thousands of British civilians die. Entire neighborhoods are obliterated. The psychological impact is devastating. Britain's fought for 5 years. They've endured the Blitz. They've sacrificed everything. And now, after D-Day's failure, it seems endless. Worse, German scientists are working on V-3 and V-4 weapons. Longer range, bigger warheads. Rockets that can hit New York City from Europe. By early 1945, this isn't theoretical. It's 6 months away from reality. Meanwhile, the Nazi nuclear program accelerates. With resources no longer diverted to defending France from invasion. With scientists no longer worried about Allied bombing raids disrupting their work. They make breakthroughs. In February 1945, German scientists achieve a sustained nuclear reaction. They're 12 to 18 months from a deployable weapon. Britain's darkest hour, 1945. By spring 1945, Britain's in an impossible position. The economy's shattered. 5 years of total war have bankrupted the nation. Food's rationed to starvation levels. Coal's running out. The population's exhausted. V-2 rockets hit London daily. Casualty lists grow. Parliament's been struck twice. Buckingham Palace has taken 3 direct hits. And now intelligence reports confirm Germany's building an atomic bomb. Churchill faces the unthinkable. Lord Halifax and other ministers approach him privately. Perhaps, they suggest, it's time to negotiate terms. Churchill refuses. "We shall never surrender," he growls. But privately, even he's not sure what victory looks like anymore. The Americans? They're focused on Japan. The Pacific War's still raging. MacArthur's island hopping toward Tokyo. The Manhattan Project's making progress, but it's focused on Japan, not Europe. Roosevelt dies in April 1945, just like in our timeline. But instead of dying with victory in Europe days away, he dies with Europe still under Nazi control. His last words reportedly include, "Those beaches. Those damn beaches." Harry Truman becomes president. He's been in office 82 days. He barely knows about the atomic bomb project. And now he's facing the most complex strategic situation any president has ever confronted. The Soviet steamroller, 1945 to 1946. While the West flounders, the Red Army advances. They've taken Poland. They're pushing into Germany from the east, and they're not slowing down. In our timeline, the Soviets and Western allies met at the Elbe River and divided Germany. In this timeline, there are no Western allies in Germany. There's no one to meet. Soviet forces capture Berlin in May 1945, just like in our timeline, except this time, there's no race with Western armies. They take their time. They secure everything. They capture the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. They seize all German nuclear research. They grab Werner Heisenberg and Otto Hahn and hundreds of other scientists. They load them on trains heading east. And they keep going west. Stalin's calculation is simple. Germany can't fight on two fronts, but there is no Western Front. So the Red Army advances through Germany, into France, into the Low Countries. German forces are collapsing. They've been fighting for 6 years. They're exhausted, undersupplied, and demoralized. When the Soviets hit them with overwhelming force, they crumble. By August 1945, the Red Army is approaching the French border. This is when everything changes. The American Dilemma, August 1945. August 6, 1945. In our timeline, this is when America dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. In this timeline, Truman faces a different choice. The Manhattan Project has produced 3 atomic bombs. In our timeline, 2 were used on Japan. In this timeline, Japan's still fighting, but that's not the immediate crisis. The immediate crisis is that Soviet forces are about to occupy all of continental Europe. Truman's military advisors present him with options. Option A: drop atomic bombs on Soviet forces advancing through Europe. This would kill hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers and civilians. It would likely start World War III. It would turn the USSR from ally to mortal enemy permanently. Option B: drop the bombs on Japan as planned, end the Pacific War, then turn full attention to Europe. Hope that the demonstration of atomic power makes Stalin hesitate. Option C: negotiate with Stalin. Recognize Soviet control of Eastern and Central Europe. Try to salvage Western Europe through diplomacy and the threat of atomic weapons. Option D: use the bombs to hit German military and industrial targets, helping Soviet advance while demonstrating American power. Try to maintain the alliance. Truman chooses option B. The bombs fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrenders on August 15th. But Stalin doesn't hesitate. He knows America only had 2 bombs. He's wrong. There's a third, but his intelligence suggests otherwise. He knows it takes months to build more. He knows the American public is exhausted and has no appetite for another war in Europe. The Red Army continues advancing. The fall of Western Europe. Fall 1945, winter 1946. German resistance collapses. Wehrmacht soldiers surrender en masse to the Soviets, not because they want to, but because they have no choice. Hitler, holed up in Berlin in our timeline, is either captured or kills himself in this one too. The Nazi regime collapses. But liberation doesn't come from the West. It comes from the East. Soviet forces sweep through Germany, into France, Belgium, the Netherlands. They're liberating Europe from fascism. And technically, they are. But liberation by the Red Army looks very different from liberation by the Americans and British. Paris falls to Soviet control in October 1945. Not through battle. The Germans have already fled. The Free French forces under de Gaulle try to establish control, but Soviet tanks roll in and politely but firmly explain that the Red Army has liberated the city. De Gaulle is furious. But what can he do? He has a few thousand resistance fighters. The Soviets have 3 million battle-hardened soldiers. By December 1945, the Red Army controls everything east of the Rhine. By March 1946, they're at the Atlantic coast. Britain watches in horror from across the Channel. The nightmare scenario has come true. All of continental Europe under hostile control. Not German control this time, Soviet control. The New Iron Curtain, 1946. Churchill, back in power after the 1945 British election, which goes differently in this timeline, gives a speech in March 1946. He's standing not in Fulton, Missouri, but in London, addressing a bombed-out parliament. An iron curtain has descended across the continent, he declares. From Lisbon in the west to Vladivostok in the east, communist regimes now hold sway over hundreds of millions of people. Except this iron curtain is much further west than in our timeline. Portugal, Spain, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Germany, Italy, all are under Soviet occupation or influence. Stalin establishes people's republics everywhere. Communist governments are installed. Free elections are promised, but never happen, or are rigged completely. The Marshall Plan doesn't exist. America has no foothold in Europe to rebuild. The economic miracle of Western European recovery never happens. NATO doesn't form, at least not the way we know it. It's just Britain and America, isolated on their island and continent, staring at a Soviet empire that controls from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The continuing Holocaust, the worst reality. Here's the darkest aspect of this timeline. The Holocaust continues longer. In our timeline, D-Day's success meant Allied forces liberated concentration camps by spring 1945. The full scope of Nazi atrocities was documented and stopped. In this timeline, many camps are eventually liberated by Soviet forces, but months later. Auschwitz operates into late 1945. Bergen-Belsen into early 1946. Treblinka's gas chambers keep running. Hundreds of thousands more die, maybe 1 million more. The death toll climbs beyond 7 million before the killing finally stops. And when it stops, it's not documented the same way. Soviet liberators take footage, but it disappears into Soviet archives. The world doesn't see it. The Nuremberg trials either don't happen or happen in Moscow, behind closed doors. Holocaust denial in this timeline becomes more feasible. Without American and British documentation, without Western journalists photographing the camps, without Eisenhower ordering, photograph everything so no one can deny this happened, the full truth is muddied. This is perhaps the cruelest outcome of D-Day's failure, not just that more innocents die, but that their deaths are hidden, denied, forgotten. The technological divergence, 1946 to 1950, the post-war technological boom that defined our timeline doesn't happen the same way. In our timeline, German scientists were split between the Soviets and Americans. Von Braun and others went to America, kickstarting NASA. Soviet scientists got others, kickstarting their space program. Competition drove innovation. In this timeline, Soviets capture nearly all German scientists and technology. They gain a massive technological advantage. But here's the twist. Stalin's paranoia cripples them. He distrusts the German scientists. Many are executed or imprisoned. Their research is confiscated but poorly understood. Bureaucrats make technical decisions. Innovation slows. America, meanwhile, is isolated but motivated. The realization that they're alone against a Soviet empire controlling Eurasia focuses resources dramatically. The American nuclear program accelerates. By 1948, America has 50 atomic bombs. By 1950, over 300. The production line is running continuously. Jet aircraft development, radar technology, computer development. America pours everything into maintaining technological superiority because it's their only advantage. But the space race doesn't happen, at least not the inspiring version we remember. There's no moment of competing ideologies showing what humans can achieve. Instead, it's just military technology development shrouded in secrecy. No one small step for man, no Apollo 11, no inspiring images of Earth from space that help birth the environmental movement. Just weapons, just missiles, just mutual assured destruction. The Cold War that's actually hot, 1950s. The 1950s in this timeline are marked by constant proxy wars, but they're worse than in our timeline. Korea still happens, Or maybe it doesn't, because the geopolitical situation is so different. What definitely happens: Soviet-backed insurgencies throughout what remains of the free world: South America, Africa, Middle East, Asia. Britain, barely recovered from the war, tries to hold its empire together but can't. India gains independence in chaos. Colonial holdings in Africa collapse. America is stretched impossibly thin, trying to support anti-communist forces on 4 continents while maintaining defense of the Western Hemisphere. The nuclear brinksmanship is constant. Not just Cuban Missile Crisis level events. That's every year. Multiple times per year. Small-scale nuclear exchanges become thinkable. In 1954, a border conflict between Soviet and American forces in the Middle East nearly goes nuclear. Tactical weapons are almost used. The world lives in perpetual terror. Cultural wasteland, the 1960s that weren't. The cultural flourishing of the 1960s doesn't happen. No British invasion, because Britain's an impoverished island under constant threat. No Beatles revolution, no Rolling Stones, no Woodstock, no counterculture movement, at least not the creative, optimistic one we remember. There's resistance to authoritarianism, but it's grimmer, more desperate. Television and film industries are stunted. Hollywood exists, but creativity is stifled by both government propaganda and economic depression. The optimistic sci-fi of Star Trek doesn't emerge because the future looks bleak, not hopeful. Art becomes either propaganda or underground resistance. There's no middle ground of commercial creativity. The sexual revolution happens, but differently, out of desperation and nihilism, rather than liberation and joy. In Soviet-controlled Europe, socialist realism dominates. Art serves the state. Innovation is crushed. The avant-garde that flourished in post-war Paris and Berlin doesn't exist. An entire generation's creative potential is wasted. The economic divergence. The global economy looks nothing like our timeline. Western Europe's economic miracle never happens. Instead of prosperity and integration, it's poverty and oppression under Soviet control. The European Union doesn't exist. Instead, there's the expanded Soviet sphere with command economies that slowly stagnate. Britain suffers economically without European trade partners. By the 1960s, it's a second-tier power struggling to maintain relevance. America becomes even more economically dominant in the free world. But the free world is much smaller. Just the Americas, parts of Asia, Middle East fragments, Australia, and Britain. Global trade is bifurcated. 2 separate economic systems with minimal interaction. Innovation slows globally because ideas and commerce don't flow freely. The computing revolution still happens in America, but slower. The internet might not emerge until the 1990s or 2000s, if at all. The economic and scientific collaboration that drove technology development in our timeline doesn't exist. Middle East, chaos multiplied. Israel's formation is affected dramatically. In our timeline, Holocaust survivors and Jewish refugees found a haven in Israel, established in 1948 with Western support. In this timeline, with Western powers weakened and Soviet control over Europe, making refugee movement nearly impossible. Israel either doesn't form, or forms much weaker. The survivors who do escape Soviet Europe arrive in smaller numbers. Western support is tepid. America and Britain have bigger problems. The Arab-Israeli conflicts either don't happen the same way, or are even bloodier without Western mediation. Alternatively, Stalin might support a Jewish state as a way to create a Middle East ally, leading to a very different Israel, a communist one. Either way, the Middle East becomes an even more contested proxy war zone between Soviet and American interests. Oil politics dominate everything. America needs Middle East oil desperately. The Soviets want to control it. Every country in the region becomes a battlefield. The nuclear close calls. Multiple times in the 1950s through 1970s, the world comes within minutes of nuclear war. In 1957, a misinterpreted Soviet military exercise nearly triggers an American nuclear response. In 1962, not Cuba, but Iran becomes the flashpoint. Soviet nuclear missiles deployed there threaten American oil interests. In 1968, Soviet and American submarines clash in the North Atlantic. Both sides are carrying nuclear torpedoes. Cooler heads prevail by minutes. In 1973, during a Middle East crisis, an American early warning system malfunctions and shows incoming Soviet missiles. It's a flock of geese. But for 8 minutes, B-52 bombers are in the air with nuclear payloads before the error is discovered. The world survives by luck and the actions of individual officers refusing to follow launch protocols. But each near miss shaves years off human life expectancy from stress alone. Where we end up, 1980s present. By the 1980s in this timeline, the world is exhausted. The Soviet Empire is massive but cracking. Command economies can't match American innovation. The population is restive. The gulags are full. Eastern Europe wants freedom. But there's no Reagan saying, "Tear down this wall," because there's no Berlin Wall. Berlin's deep inside Soviet territory. The symbol of division is the English Channel. When the Soviet system finally collapses, and it does, probably in the early 1990s, it's more violent. No peaceful revolution. Instead, fragmentary chaos, civil wars, nuclear weapons in unstable hands. America, meanwhile, has maintained technological superiority, but at a cost. The military-industrial complex dominates society. Civil liberties have been curtailed in the name of security. McCarthyism never really ended. The world that emerges from the Cold War in this timeline is more authoritarian, more militarized, more fearful. Democracy isn't the triumphant model that spreads globally. Instead, it's one system among many, clinging to existence in North America and a few other places. The prosperity and peace we've enjoyed in our timeline, the long peace, as scholars call it, never happens. Wars are constant, economic growth is anemic, technology advances but doesn't spread widely. By 2026, human civilization has likely achieved less. We might not have smartphones. We definitely don't have social media connecting billions. Space exploration is minimal. Medical advances lag by decades. Life expectancy is lower. Freedom is rarer. Hope is scarcer. All of this entire dark timeline, was prevented by the men who stormed those beaches on June 6, 1944. They didn't know the stakes. They couldn't imagine the world we live in now. They just knew they had a mission. Get off that beach, climb those cliffs, take those bunkers. Thousands died doing it. Thousands more were wounded. But they succeeded. And because they succeeded, we have NATO instead of Soviet occupation of Europe. We have the EU instead of an iron curtain at the Atlantic. We have 70 years of relative peace instead of constant war. We have the internet. We have space exploration. We have global trade and cultural exchange. We have freedom, democracy, and human rights as globally recognized ideals, even when they're not always upheld. We have all of this because of one day. One impossible victory snatched from the jaws of certain defeat. D-Day succeeded against all odds. The weather was terrible. The Germans were prepared. The casualties were horrific. For hours, the outcome was in doubt. But those soldiers didn't give up. They pushed forward. They fought for every inch of sand. They bled and died so their children and grandchildren wouldn't have to. And here we are, living in the world they built, the world they saved. When you see footage of those beaches, remember, this wasn't inevitable. This was a choice. This was courage. This was sacrifice. And this was the day that saved the world. Never forget June 6, 1944. Never forget what they did. Never forget how close we came to losing everything. Because the difference between our world and that dark timeline, one day, one beach, one impossible victory. That's how thin the thread of history really is.